I was scarred early when I was young because I was playing World of Warcraft. I remember, and in classic in vanilla, even up to Burning Crusade, you had to find your groups and you had to kind of spam kind of the looking for group channel and say, hey, I'm looking for a tank, I'm looking for this, I'm looking for that. And that kind of, even though it was annoying and it spammed the channel, it gave some life because people had to kind of make a party, meet up together, organize how to get to that dungeon or that activity. And you can't calculate that on paper. I'm sure the product managers, the producers, they got around and thought, okay, we're looking at can we automate this? Can we make this into a kind of just a quick solution where you basically queue up and then automatically get ported to the instance or that dungeon? There's no travel, there's no organizing the group, everything's done for you. And on paper, that means that more people come back to play. They don't have to spend so much time trying to find a dungeon. And I think that worked for a particular vision of the game, but the cost of that was that kind of the game lost a little bit of its soul as an MMORPG. And I always found that so interesting because there's that BlizzCon, that famous one where you think you do, but you don't. And he goes into like painstaking detail about like how players found this whole process annoying, which turned out he was kind of wrong because a lot of players actually loved that. And that I always think of that example because that makes me think like all the data in the world can tell you that this should be optimized, that this is better. But if you don't have that one person in the room saying, are we losing something here? Is this game more than just retention and daily active users and growth? Is there a social element that maybe we could have tried to harbor? And that's why I go back to gut. I don't think those things can be often kind of really noted down. So if anything, I just wanted to add to what you were saying because I
Yeah,
completely agree.
it's a great
There
point. It's a
there's a
really
fine
great point.
balance, right? Like how do you measure that? Because it's another book is the competitor's dilemma, and it's written by a Harvard professor, and he talks about how during the semiconductor kind of industry growth where you got these kind of little hard disks that would keep kind of getting smaller and faster every 3 4 years, you had a series of startups that would just kind of like become incumbents, then suddenly grow really fast, and then all of a sudden they would fail because another startup would come that would use a technology that used the next more kind of evolved disk. And on paper, all those companies did the right thing. They had a market. They were listening to their users. They were like, perfect. You guys want this? We'll keep giving it to you because that's what's going to make us money. But they never looked at kind of the wider industry and like what was happening there and what was the future of kind of that semi disc. And all of a sudden you just had this very repeatable kind of documentative kind of examples of just startups failing, doing everything right. You could look at Kodak, IBM, just Blockbuster, all these companies that were just doing right by their customers, looking at the metrics, looking at the data, and then gone, right? And
Mm.
from a business school standpoint, you guys were doing the right thing, but maybe you didn't react enough, or maybe you weren't considering enough of the future. So kind of what are your thoughts on kind of our games doing that right now? Like do you see a lot of for young people listening, people want to get into the games industry, and every time you open every time you open up your LinkedIn or whatever, there's a studio kind of crashing down. What's going on really? Like in your mind, what's happening here with all unable to make a game that or at least kind of keep the industry going strong?
Yeah, I think part of the challenge, and certainly the recent challenge, post-COVID era, I heard someone describe it as stupid money era, the VC surge in game studio funding is that, like you said, that repeatable pattern that you might have a tech company, it still has its flaws, but there are ways to, do the right thing. It doesn't really exist in games. And like you said, that WoW example is really a good one in that, you can have all of the evidence that what you are doing should work, but so much of it relies on execution and perception that it still can fail to land. And then, like you said, there's always the chance, and usually this is the case, basically everything I've worked on, someone somewhere is doing what you are doing, maybe faster and cheaper or better, or with a twist you didn't think of. And then how do you react? That's very difficult for games companies. And a lot of projects and a lot of studios wind down because everything is built around, okay, you hit milestone A, and then milestone B, and then milestone C, and then the game launches, and then everything goes well, and then you operate it. And the reality is, it's It's much more like finding that product market fit is all over the place, and the level of flexibility a game has is very limited in most cases for most types of game, for most types of studio, versus a few people building an app to, yeah, like I was saying, you know ride share, for example. There's a lot you can do. You can see companies pivoting to delivering food, for example, but can you imagine Concord saying, okay, perception is weak from our beta, and we didn't see great player sentiment, and certainly didn't see great stats. It's cost a lot of money, and for us, we think it's no longer a hero shooter. It needs to be. Um, the inability to flex and change and pivot, and maybe a little bit of not wanting to at that cost. Okay, it cost us maybe a lot of money to get to this stage. Have we got the grit to say another 3 years and it could still make that huge ROI? I don't know, because games are so costly and they are very difficult to get out. It's miraculous games launch because they are so hard and they require so many people's blood, sweat, and tears. So I think that's part of it, right? Is there's a lot of betting from companies on signals that all make sense, right? The pedigree, the market opportunity, it all adds up. I'm sure as PMs, we would look at it and say, yep, that looks good to green light. But then as things go on, the inability to react to that or take risks or pivot effectively, that is, what kills a lot of games and a lot of studios. And it's something as an industry, um, there aren't many great examples of. And the examples we do have are those smaller teams with, dare I say, less of a pedigree or professional structure that can react to these things and use their limited runway and use some of that initial attention, even if it's negative, to make the game the players are showing they want. I think an example of that everyone will point to is a game like No Man's Sky, which is still small and lean, and building an experience that players clearly want. But they had a very rocky start, and if that game would have been quadruple the cost with quadruple their headcount, would they have been able to do that if they were published by a major publisher or were VC backed and were expected to 100x the seed return? Would they have been able to do what they did? Maybe not, but they were, because they owned what they did and they had the gut and the determination. There was someone at the helm, Sean Murray, right, to say, we can still make this work. So you need a lot. You need a lot there to make it work. And yeah, it's only getting more like that, in my opinion, as the number of games being made increases, the number of teams that can make fantastic professional quality games increases. So being willing to find your audience, satisfy what they want, and then chuck it all in the bin and pivot if you really need to. That's a scary word. Pivot is a scary word. Number of conversations I've had in my career where I've said the word pivot and said, let's not call it a pivot, right? Because it does. It brings up feelings to teams. Okay, well, I don't know what we're doing anymore, or what's happening to my work, or put a lot of hours and effort into that. Can I really stomach a big change? And can we pull it off? But certainly, friends of mine that work in other industries as a PM, it's not a dirty word. It's an exciting word. And, I'd love a little bit more of that thinking. And I've had a bit of it in my career in the smaller places, the startups in mobile. And, even here in my current job, a willingness to do it. And I think more than ever, that's what's needed. It's an ability to somehow have a smaller ship that's not that big oil tanker, or just know how to pivot the oil tanker if it is an oil tanker. And if it can only work if exactly what you've been making for a long time at great cost hits the market and then is a huge success, feels a lot like roulette and a lot less like poker or blackjack, where at least you can, make some tactical choices.
So when you say old tanker, I was almost thinking like an MVP and like trying to just build, or at least some kind of concept that you can work with, but you keep your options open. You build maybe the core. Um, I wanted to add also as well, the idea of pivoting is so essential. Kind of when I'm teaching class, especially in the beginning, like every PM has to learn either to pivot or to persevere. And that decision is one of the more important ones because then you start getting into sunken cost. If you decide to persevere, and then all of a sudden everything you do following that decision is going to add up when you have to turn back around and say, okay, now we have to pivot.
Mm.
So, and I don't see it just as something that happens like on the job, but I think just in general in life, the ability to pivot means that you have the ability or are looking to continue learning to expand how you approach problems, how you approach a different context, a different team,
Yeah.
which is why really product management to me is one of the coolest jobs. I think anyone can be a product manager because it really requires being empathetic, being somewhat analytical, but being able to look at numbers and say, okay, which one is better objectively to the context, have an understanding of kind of who your users are and why they're using it, having an appreciation for the cost that's obviously in games is ballooning, and understanding that at the end of the day, we have to make money and we have to respect it. We can't make the most amazing game in the world and then also spend this amount of money that's unsustainable. Um, and it all goes back to this pivot or persevere. Can you tell me about a moment at some point in your journey, let's call it your product journey, your gaming product journey, that you've had to pivot, that you maybe had to have a tough conversation with a team, and it resulted in a decision that was difficult, but that it made sense, or hopefully that you were able to back it up in a way that showed vision, that showed an understanding of the problem, and appreciation for the work committed so far,
Yeah.
etc.
Yeah. You know what? I'll give you two because I think one will be interesting, and I think partly um, why I ended up in product. Little to my, it was no deliberate choice when I started in games, is that I had to confront that, fight, flight, pivot, or persevere, make that decision quite early on in my professional life. So, I went to university to study game development. I did well. I got a first class degree. That's not me bragging. That's just giving you context, maybe a little bit bragging, but mostly context. And I graduated, and I really struggled to convert that into a games industry job. I didn't appreciate the quality of portfolio that was required, the level of experience that was expected, and I wasn't very effective at finding jobs either. I didn't understand where jobs were and how to network, and as a result, I did some internships, trying to find a job as sort of generalist game designer, and in that time, I went very deep into my overdraft and I ran out of money, and at that point I had to ask myself, to confront myself, no, can I keep on doing this? Do I want to support this um, effort to try and become a professional game designer, do more internships and hope they convert into a paying job, self-funding it through some other work? Or do I need to take a different tact? And at that point I did take a different tact, and I was lucky to find a job as a games tester in Sega, in their Brentford office, Sega Europe, as a 0 hours games tester. They don't do that sort of employment in the UK anymore. You're on demand, you might have work, you might not. And it was one of the best choices ever in my life to accept that I wasn't getting traction and I took too long. Like you said, the sunk cost of like a year of interning and 3 years of university behind it. I can make this work versus this isn't working. What might? That's something I've spoken to a lot of people since when they ask how to get into the games industry is, okay, a lot of people end up in the games industry not because they took a laser focused approach, I'm going to be this role in this many years, but because they learned everything they could and they found a way to be useful to a games business, which they then could convert inside the organization into moving towards what they wanted. So that for me, early on in my career, it meant that at work, when I was, working on games with a team, I had some sort of instinctual approach to that carried through when I moved into game design via systems and monetization and product management because, you know, I had that real world example, and money to me was something tangible. I had a fixed amount of it. I had to be very careful with it. And that translated to product management quite well. What's the best chance of success with the smallest um, cost? Let's start there. And if it doesn't work, okay, we'll
MVP.
change. Yeah, MVP, exactly, MVP. And really hard to build a good one, but yeah, that mindset. So in the games world, lots of examples I can think of. But I'll give an example from one of the Hungry Shark games we're working on, Hungry Shark World. And for a long time, that game is a sequel to a very successful, launched around the time of the boom in smartphone gaming, certainly the App Store. Launching a sequel to a game like that It's already very established, and the sequel itself is not, you know, distinctively different looking, but is bigger, more expansive, deeper meta game with the intention of, being more profitable, making better revenues from each player. It carried a lot of baggage from the first game. What worked there had to work here. People had expectations. And as a result, the game's economy was always this sore point. There were lots of obvious issues, and obvious approaches didn't work. We'll solve these economic issues by introducing randomization, or a gacha for progression instead of a linear progression. The game itself, I must say, has no energy mechanics, right? So some best practices not adhered to. So if I'm very good at the game, I can play for an hour and 20 minutes and earn an insane amount of soft currency. How do you balance for that sort of economy? We tried a lot of things, lots and lots of different approaches, some very expensive bets that didn't pay off. I was at a conference in London, Games First, Supercell's conference. I should bring that back to London, just in case anyone listening, maybe a wing and a prayer. And the GM of Heyday at the time said they had a similar issue on Heyday. The game was coming up to 8 or 9, 10 years old at the time, and they said they tried to resolve economic inflation and other issues, and ultimately they just found that they sort of diverted the river and it would flow back in. Players had certain behaviors that were hard stuck to change, and it's partly why they loved the game. And World of Warcraft example you gave is another great thing. It's like, yes, I can fix this on paper, only if people use it and enjoy it. And that dynamite part is so hard to nail. So they said, economy broken, no problem. We'll build a new economy when you get to the end of this economy. And for me, I was like, oh my God, why haven't I thought of that? It's like the simplest thing ever. And that was a great example. I sat down with the team and I said, look, no more. We will accept it. We will glorify it. If you can break the game, great. You're going to love playing the game. If you play an hour and 20 minutes to break our economy, fantastic. That's an hour and 20 minutes of our game. Yes, please. So you do that all you want. And then at some point, we're going to convert all that effort, because we expect you to have way too much soft currency, into a second economy that takes that soft currency and turns it into something you really care about. This new tier of sharks, apex sharks, that were designed based on the most popular sharks, mutated them. We created a narrative around that, new mode to do that, new currencies to purchase the sharks. And it felt like a soft reboot of the game at the time when it came out. It revitalized attention around the game, the featuring on the app stores. It really, really helped the long-term retention. And it actually helped the one thing that we wanted to do most of all, which it had a clean economy at the end of it. Okay, we now know players up to this point, they will use this, and then we can manage their pearls with the currency. And like you said, it really helped the team because it embraced swimming with the tide. It embraced what they did as players, what they had seen, what they intuited, and it didn't throw away the things that they'd been working on, like some of the other efforts, which were fantastic game design and made perfect sense on paper, but just didn't land with players and had to go in the bin. They were A/B tested and didn't deliver, so off they went. So, it let us keep more of what we make by accepting players and their quirks and what they liked about the game. And again, it's that WoW example. It really resonates for me because the game was 6, 7 years old at the time, and it was an admission that it's not our game anymore. It's not for us to change your behavior. It's for us to service that behavior, right? We
Yeah.
can't make you play the game differently. This is how you like to play it, and we should only enhance that rather than tell you, you know, no more can you play those hour and 20-minute sessions on the plane. Cool. If you want it, have it.
And yeah, let's chat again soon. And if anyone has any advice, please just reach out, ask some comments. I think there's so much more to talk about on this, but thank you again.
Dude, thank you. It's been a pleasure. Really, really good fun. Great questions. Had a blast talking to you today.
Appreciate you, man.